Okay, so the next two things I wanted to talk about for this double feature segment are these two rock musicals. I know that for Phantom of the Paradise, a lot of people talk about Rocky Horror alongside with it. We've already talked about Rocky Horror. We did a video with it in Shock Treatment a few years back, me and my brother did. So I decided to put it with a more recent, by standards of the 70s to the 2000s, with Repo. And another thing that's interesting about these is one of these is one that I pretty much loved right away, but it took a while to come into my life. And then one where I saw it around the time it first came out, and I actually really didn't care for it. And even though it's the kind of movie that seems like it's one that you'd really love when you're younger, and then you'd maybe kind of grow out of it a little bit, it's kind of been the opposite a little bit, where I didn't like it when I first saw it, but as I've gotten older, somehow I've actually grown to appreciate it a little more. So that's how we're going to approach these two. I want to start with Phantom of the Paradise, of course, which is I'm not sure what it is about this movie exactly, but the way it feels like a movie that's meant for like after hours, where I've seen this movie probably 4 times, and the first time I deliberately watched it like really late at night, like midnight or after, and then the other 3 times I watched it, it actually just kind of fell into place unintentionally. That I watched it at like 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning. It's like that perfect, either like I said, midnight movie, or if you're an insomniac and you can't sleep at like 2 or 3 in the morning, this has been a go-to, and it just fits that vibe. Like, it feels like there's nothing like a movie like this that's so surreal already, and just watching it in the dead of night just gives it a whole other vibe in this really great way. And so, going into it and seeing this, you just know right away that it's a De Palma passion project. Like, it's one of those movies that just did not do well at all, but you would think that that just wouldn't matter for a movie that's this unique and this insane and sticks with you this much. Like, you're never going to, like, even though you could say there's a lot of things that the story comes from and is inspired by and based on, and you might see other rock musicals down the road, it still to this day, all these decades later, feels like there's nothing like Phantom of the Paradise, and I will always love it for that. And it's like, when you look at our protagonist alone with William Finley, who was such a unique actor in his own right, who mostly showed up in, like, he had like that cameo in the Funhouse, and he was in De Palma's movies. He was like De Palma's roommate, and that's how they knew each other. But he's one of those actors that you wonder how he was so underutilized. And looking at him here, where you can see him as like this sensitive songwriter and this sensitive artist, and this person that's like hopeful that one of these days he's gonna really become something if he just puts himself out there. But then we see these moments where like his temper comes out, and then by the time he's the Phantom, we get this whole, like, you can sense that he can be maniacal and obsessive and almost monster-like. And the fact that he can have that arc just in this movie alone is really spectacular, and it's a really spectacular performance. We already talked about earlier in our last double feature segment his crazy-ass, if brief, performance in Eaten Alive. And yeah, so this is a movie that also just feels like, why did we not see more of him? Like, this dude is absolutely a star. And so, and it almost kind of plays into his part in the movie a little bit. And talking about him making a musical about Faust, and the fact that this is essentially, like, what he's singing about in his music is what's currently happening to him with Swan, who is played by Paul Williams. I've heard some people say that they think Paul Williams is pretty miscast in this, and I can kind of get that, but I also like the idea of, like, the devil is at his most threatening when he's, like, in the most unassuming form, when he seems like he's at his least threatening. So I feel like in that regard alone, Paul Williams really fits the bill, but also the fact that this is his music throughout the thing, where it's like, to have him be the architect of everything that's happening in the movie and sort of the architect of the music we're actually hearing kind of feels like it also goes hand in hand in this really cool and almost meta kind of way. So I love everything that's going on here. So I really I go into this movie with like no complaints that I can really think of. So and the fact that it touches on those with like this deal with the devil and what happens to his music and ultimately to him, just showing just the horrors of the entertainment industry. I've heard when it was when De Palma made Get to Know Your Rabbit shortly before this, how this kind of echoes how he felt about going into that studio system for the first time. That makes perfect sense. And when you see like the auditions in big quotes, where it's scantily clad women that just go onto a bed while Swan watches them, or when you're when just the fact that his music is stolen, but it's not enough that it was stolen. You have to frame him too, and then ultimately practically kill him, and kill him 2 or 3 times over by the time we're at the end of the movie, actually. And just everything is... You just get this vibe that everything is evil, and you get the sense that it's being watched over by a devil of sorts, which is, for the most part, what we think is going on until we get some reveals later. But obviously another thing that's playing a big part in this is the insane production design, where one scene that always stands out to me that I love so much is when he first goes into the office, when he's immediately denied, where he goes through like that black curved hallway that's got like a lighted ceiling and it's got like the records on the walls. And it's like, what's interesting about this is that it's a set that really pops off the screen in this really great way, but at the same time there's like a cold and sterile nature to it in regards to like how, like when you walk into an office like that, especially one where you hardly anybody will go into this office without immediately be turned away. So when you establish that cold and sterile feeling, but you still are able to make a set that feels that way, but also feels spectacular in its own way, that's... I don't even know how one does that. So so the production designer is a big star of this movie also. And of course, just being a De Palma movie, there's going to be a lot of different things. Obviously, we're going to have, some Hitchcock stuff in there, because De Palma has to have his Hitchcock at some point. But also the stuff like the split screens and the use of POV. There's I like the way the point of view hides his hideousness for a while until he's eventually able to cover himself and put on the iconic helmet. I also love the fact that even when he's in phantom form, the fact that Swan recognizes him immediately still and knows exactly what's going on. And it is to my understanding that this has inspired a lot of people, particularly Daft Punk comes to mind, who apparently love this movie, which goes without saying. And and also another thing is, to my understanding, Nicolas Cage has said that whenever he's preparing for like a really big role or when he's going to go big, he always comes back to this movie, and that just makes complete sense to me. Like this and somebody like Nicolas Cage finding his wild and insane artistry by watching a movie like this, you can see the influence coming out in all these different places, and it's fantastic. And talking more about the technical aspects, when you look at like the audition montage in the middle of the movie, and this is basically whether it's everything we've talked about, whether it be the music or costumes or editing or just the way things are shot, like every technical aspect is working in unison with this montage, and it's really fantastic. And then when you've got all these technical aspects and these great and memorable leading characters and this insane story going on, throwing in some of these side characters too. Obviously, there's Phoenix. This was apparently Jessica Harper's first movie, and we just talked about her in Suspiria a few videos back, and this is a fantastic way to show her for the first time and make her almost just this sort of visual, desirable thing, and to see him driven as much as he is to what he does here and becoming the Phantom and doing the whole thing. It's like, I would lay waste everything for Jessica Harper too at this point, and she plays that perfectly. another real star of this movie is another person that's just really underappreciated in general, and that's Garrett Graham as Beef, just really swinging for the fences in this really spectacular way. It's Garrett Graham's also like a genre staple, because the first time I ever saw him was when he was the douchey foster dad in Child's Play 2. He's in like Terror Vision. He's Bud the Chud, and seeing him here and the way he plays this character in this really over the top comedic way. And saying over the top is like putting it mildly. You could say that about everything in this movie, to say that over the top is putting it mildly. But in particular, the way he plays the onstage persona and then the completely different character he plays offstage is really fantastic and extremely funny. And so everything, and the fact that everything fits the tone. Like, you don't, like, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's an over-the-top movie, and like in concept and execution, but it's like every single detail is in tandem with everything else. There isn't anything that's like not matching the tone. Like, everything in this movie is crazy, from the big details and the things in the foreground and the small details and the things in the background. Just everything is all in this shared universe and working at the same time, and hitting all the same notes. And it's, yeah. And even stuff when we get to when we're really first seeing him as the Phantom character, when he's got like the distorted voice and when he's singing Phoenix, that's something you can hear forever after you've heard it the first time. And that maniacal laugh as he's killing Beef, and it's, yeah, like I said, and the fact that this just inspired so many people to go insane artistically later on and through the decades, and that it still manages to do that, just can't be overstated. And so even if I feel like I'm talking in circles now, I still feel like I'm not expressing the amazingness of this movie. So, and I haven't even really mentioned yet that the music kicks ass. Like, that's kind of a major factor. Like, all this stuff is working as well as it is, but being a musical, it does have to. If the music didn't work, a lot of this wouldn't really mean anything. So, I suppose we might go into that with Repo a little bit, but here in particular, the music just matches all this vibe also, and is fantastic by itself. Like, it's music where you don't need the movie for it to be fucking awesome, and I love that. And then, and like I was saying before, I also can't get over how unique the movie feels, despite the fact that you could say, oh yeah, it's the Faust story, or it's Phantom of the Opera, obviously, and when we get to the other side of Swan's story, where it becomes the Dorian Gray thing, it's like, everything that happens is pretty much a story that we already know, and that we've seen in many, many, many different forms. Yet somehow you can take 3 of those stories that we've seen in so many different forms, and we know front to back, and do something so incredibly wild that the whole thing feels like you're watching something you've never seen before, and you will never see again anything like it. Again, I don't even know how that's pulled off, but De Palma and everybody involved in this managed to do it. And even when we reach our tragic ending, where in order to kill Swan, Winslow essentially is killing himself, and then Phoenix finally realizes who he is, and it's just this beautiful, tragic, like, Shakespearean ending, and then somehow manages to we still leave fired up and excited about what we just saw, even with what is essentially a downer ending. It's like, it's impossible to leave this movie just not super fired up about it, and I just love that. And it's one of those movies that I love it the more that I see it. Like I said, the 4 times that I've seen it, I think all those times just get better and better, and I can't wait for the 5th and 6th and 7th and 10th and 20th and all of that. So that's how I feel about Phantom of the Paradise. Coming over to Repo, like I said, it is a movie that I didn't like when I first saw it, when it first came out. Which, like I said, is interesting because you would think that's more or less the target demographic, the age I would have been when this came out, I think. But as I've gotten older and I've really, really gone down the deep rabbit holes of different kinds of horror, I've started to embrace the more unique stuff that I find, horror wise in particular, and the stuff that just goes all in unapologetically. That just, the more I go, the more that stuff just gets more and more appealing. And especially when it's something that speaks to a very specific group of fans, and a very specific demographic. And it's like I'm getting to a point to where even when I'm not that demographic or very far away from that demographic, just being able to recognize that and knowing that there is likely a very large group of people that this movie means practically everything to. I feel like even if I'm not one of those people, that's something that you can sense and something that'll make a movie stand out the way this one does. And it's also just like this movie is basically that goth kid you knew in your teenage years, and this is them in movie form. And I feel like that sounds like a dig, but I really mean it in the most affectionate way possible. Just like you could say Phantom of the Paradise is like the weird artist, the weird artistic person that you know in movie form, and you know that they will love and be obsessed with that movie. And that there are similar people for Repo who may even, in some cases, be the same crowd. But to go into more of the specifics of Repo, to talk about the style, because this is Darren Lynn Bousman, who was known at the time for doing Saw movies. I think he did 2, 3, and 4, and then obviously later he'd do Spiral with Chris Rock and like the Mother's Day remake and stuff like that. Known for doing movies that are just very, very in-your-face brutal, but there's still something. He's a director that had to grow on me as well, just in general. And like I said, just going down those different horror rabbit holes, he is somebody that I find myself coming back to and being more interested than I was when he was kind of first really on the scene. And so, to talk about the style of this, again, talking understatements, and I could see one that could argue where, if you want to talk about the very overused phrase, style over substance, this might be one of the very first movies that comes up. First of all, I've never even really been I've never really cared much for that criticism, because it's not only is it just kind of a lazy thing you can just throw out there that's a cliche at this point, but like when something is so much of a distinctive style and is so much its own feel and its own world, that really can go a really long way. And talking about like, David Hackle here, who's also obviously worked on a lot of the Saw movies, he's the production designer, and just there's so much going on here. You could make, Blade Runner comparisons or whatever you want to do, but this also is a movie that feels like it's in a very specific world that I could immediately recognize as this movie's world and not something from anything it might have been inspired by. And that, I feel like that really speaks volumes in itself. And we've got like the comic book opening that gives us the backstory instead of just giving us a boring wall of text or boring narration or whatever. And this setup about what the Repo Man does and what's going on with these big companies and this rich and powerful family that's at the head of everything. How far away is this really? How far away are we from this particular world? We could make the whole video about that probably. I'm just gonna leave it at that. So, to get on to all the other aspects of the movie, we've also got the whole addiction thing going on here, whether it be being addicted to surgery or the Zydrate, which does feel like kind of an underdeveloped plot point with the grave robber and all that. But still, I do love how much is going on here and how much it really builds and sets up its world before we go into all the other insanity. So I guess the first thing we can really talk about after that is I guess you could say the star of the movie, which would be the Repo Man, who is Anthony Head, who is maybe one of my favorite performers ever. And I've seen a very limited amount of things of his too, but he's one of those performers that's all it really takes. There's, because, he was my favorite Buffy character, and when you see, obviously a lot of his stuff, a lot of his whole career has been on the stage, and I've been able to see snippets of some of the things he's done there, which is just legendary stuff. One that will stand out in this conversation is in the early 90s when he had quite a run with Rocky Horror where he was Frankenfurter. That's another thing I've seen little clips of, and the clips I've seen of Anthony Head as Frankenfurter are fucking spectacular, and I highly recommend finding those. And so, putting him at the center of this, and starting with this sort of Repo Man intro, where he comes in like a phantom, and he gets, this origin song, and we can see him and the way he they're two separate songs. The one that introduces him as the Repo Man, and the one that kind of introduces him as Nathan, where we see, the tortured father and the grieving husband, and then we see him transition from this grieving person and this troubled person into this maniacal. He's almost like an evil superhero in a way, because he's got the uniform that's full body and covers his face, and he's got the secret identity. There's a moment where he like rappels down, and but he just does these awful things by killing people for this giant company after he's been essentially blackmailed into it and tricked into it. And so there's definitely a tragedy from several angles in this story, which becomes even more complicated when we learn what we learn later about him. And talking about his daughter Shiloh, who is Alexa Vega, who's basically the whole locked up princess story, practically, if you want to look at it from this almost fairy tale like perspective we're coming from, where she's practically imprisoned, and she might be terminally ill, and she can see the whole world from her window, but she can't go out until, obviously, the story starts to unfold more. And looking at some of the characters here, there's in this whole capitalist world that's going on, and this world that takes advantage of all of the addicts and the vulnerable and everybody who's been through a tragedy, and just wrings them dry and spits them out. And there's going to be a lot of blood on a lot of people's hands. There's a lot of things going on in this movie for a movie that's considered, style over substance, but it is also a case of how much of it story-wise is working, but it's another case also where I feel like, as far as enjoyment of the movie goes and being sucked into its world and feeling its feelings, that's kind of the opera vibe, is you feel it more than anything else. So that's where I've heard a lot of criticisms, and maybe that's one of the reasons I didn't like it at the time when it first came out. But like I said, it's something that I've leaned more towards. And I think it's definitely more about the feel of it rather than the logic in it. So, like take for instance some of the other things we're looking at here, like the three siblings, where we have one of my favorites, Bill Moseley, as the insane, murderous brother that keeps ripping his shirt open and showing his scars, and kills so many people. We eventually just have to hear about more of them in the epilogue, because he's just, anybody he meets is subject to a fatal stabbing or multiple stabbings. Then you've got Paris Hilton, who I guess at the time would have been seen as like stunt casting. There was like House of Wax at this point, and some of those like throwaway comedies or whatever it was that like nobody saw. And here I do think there is, and the fact that she was like, everything in pop culture at the time, so just basically including her felt like just throwing it, like these days it's like throwing a Kardashian into a movie or something. It's like, what the fuck is that even doing here? But here, there is something about what her presence was in pop culture at the time that actually does suit this character. And the later insanity that goes on, she actually does play off quite well, and almost feels like that she is a perfect part of this insane world. Then we've got the other insane brother, Polly, who just has that nightmarish mask. And you do get, like, it's almost like a rich and powerful Sawyer family, which may explain the specific casting of Bill Moseley. And so, looking at it from this perspective, where like everything is over the top, I like to say that this movie is a 100 on a scale of 1 to 10, at pretty much all times. And like, as far as like, because like the music, we talked about how much that plays a part in Phantom of the Paradise, and how everything is working in tandem. So with Repo, it is the music might not be as strong. There is some stuff in here that really does rock, like it is really good, and there's also a lot of stuff that people might not be as kind to. I do think, and maybe I'm being too kind, but I do think there has to be a tongue-in-cheek nature to a lot of the music in it. Because even stuff that feels like ridiculous or doesn't feel like it fits musically or feels like they're really stretching for lyrics, there's even the stuff in here is catchy whether you like it or not, and you will still kind of remember it as you go further. But I do also like, when you look at the concept of the movie, of the world that we're in, and the actions that we're seeing the characters do, and the insane characters in it, and the fact that this is a rock opera set in this futuristic horror world, in the actual music, there has to be a tongue-in-cheek nature going on. Like, this is not a movie that you can do and just play it 100% straight, even if it seems like it's playing it straight on the surface. I really give it the benefit of the doubt and say that well, first of all, there's already for sure a satirical thing going on here with just the approach to what the future is, what we talked about, you know, how far away are we really from it, stuff like that. And this is like 2007 or 2008. So I do feel like there is very much a tongue-in-cheek nature going on here, despite the fact that everything looks like it's being played super, super seriously. That's really how satire works, is playing as straight face as possible. So, and I can just really appreciate as it goes the insanity of it, especially when we get to the whole climax, where we're at the big opera, and we see this just giant, it's basically this giant propaganda extravaganza. There's cult-like behavior going on, there's excessive advertising, and just the general psychotic nature of everything is all coming forward fully on display during this whole show. You've got Paris Hilton singing until her face comes off. Take a look at that, and then you look at the other side of the climax, where we have this very melodramatic tragedy going on, where we have the very violent end to Mag, and then you've got the whole reveal that Nathan has been poisoning Shiloh, and then like the characters start dying off dramatically while they're being held in their loved one's arms. And it's like, taking all of this, there's I can see where people would think that this is not meshing, but I really think there is something intentional about just everything going insane, including the melodrama itself. Like, the melodrama has to be as amped up as possible to match how amped up the rest of the movie is, and combining all these things. And again, at the end of the day, it's an opera. Opera is made to be melodramatic, so I think that's more or less my very complicated and messy and all over the place feelings on Repo. But yeah, it is one that I will willingly come back to, and just to kind of experience the craziness of this world for an hour and a half has gotten more appealing to me as time goes. It's no Phantom of the Paradise by any means, but like I said, I've kind of tried to move away from this whole comparing the two movies thing. That's why we changed to the double feature setup. But yeah, that's how I feel about these two. So we're getting into the final stretch of October at this point. I think we're getting into our last third of the month now. So we'll have all the stuff that comes with that, including the franchise, which will be the last few videos, up to the 30th, and then the 31st will be the video we all did as a panel. So hopefully everybody has fun with that. So until the next thing, I think that's it.